welcome to those of you who were here last night. And of course, warm welcome to those of you who are here for the first today. And again, of course, a very special warm welcome to Audrey from Dallas, Texas, and Margareta from Falun, Sweden. So nice to have you here. I'm sure that those of you who were here last night share my thrill and my looking forward to today's sessions. And for those who were not here last night, I can only say you better sit down and fasten your seatbelts. A little bit of practical information. We are selling sandwiches, cake, pastry, coffee and tea, cold beverages behind. We have an information desk with information about today's program, AA in general, and anything else you would like information about. I'm sure they'll be glad to help you. I know, this next point. Anything else? At the information desk, they will be selling, as my sponsor just informed me, they will be selling tickets for tonight's dinner. Please be sure you sign in. There will be some fantastic food, I'm sure. Smoking is absolutely not allowed. And you will absolutely do it anyway, I know that. But please help us to keep it clean outside and throw your cigarette butts in, there's 1 or 2 buckets outside, keep it there. If you would be so kind, thank you. During the day we will be making some collections. This convention has been, for a great part, financed by the collections made last year. So please help us make it possible to make a convention again next year. And I think we should also all keep in mind what we have gotten for free. I know I got a lot for free at least. I've been told that Al-Anon will come here today, but I shouldn't even mention it, I think, because I don't know anything about it. Forget it, I didn't say that.
I didn't hear it.
Thank you. I think we'll just get started with the first session of today with Audrey and Margareta, which is called Foundation, and I fear it has got something to do with the steps. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Audrey Chapman. I'm a recovered alcoholic.
Morning, Audrey.
We're very excited to get started with the steps this morning. We're going to talk about the first 3 steps in this first session. I'm going to talk a little bit, and Margareta's going to speak a little bit as well. What I'd like to do is start the meeting, or start today with a moment of silence and follow it with a serenity prayer. Serenity prayer. God, grant me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay, and we'll just go ahead and dive right into the book. The reason that the foundation is so important is it lets me know what I'm working with. It lets me know if I'm sitting in the right room or not. And we spoke a little bit yesterday about qualification of the newcomer and why it's so vital and why it's so important. Here's what I do know. If I don't understand the problem and I don't concede to my innermost self that I have this exact specific problem, I will never reach for the spiritual solution because I don't have to, right? So it's one reason that's so important to sit down with a newcomer and see, are they suffering from the disease of alcoholism? Because it's very different than, say, a hard drinker who's experiencing issues with alcohol, but who has the power to stop on their own. So let's just go straight to the book. One thing I do want to point out, if you've got a big book and you want to play along, on that title page it says Alcoholics Anonymous is the very first promise of the big book and the promise of the program. And it goes unnoticed oftentimes, so I want to bring attention to it. It says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. Why is that important? Because what we oftentimes hear is, I will always be recovering and I will always be sick. And there sure is not a lot of hope in that. And what the textbook promises me is that I can recover from what they're going to explain as a hopeless condition of mind and body. that I can get someplace different, and the obsession to drink or put chemicals in my body can be removed, and I can walk free and clear this. And that's the whole point of working this program, is the freedom to recover. Not a life where I'm ducking and dodging alcohol, and that I can't work in an environment that has alcohol or be in a relationship with somebody who drinks socially, but that I can absolutely walk free and clear with this without fear. That's a life worth having for an alcoholic like me. So if you will flip over to the doctor's opinion with me, they're going to make it clear in the preface and in the forwards that this is a textbook, which means it's meant to be studied. It's not a novel. It's not a one-time read, something to keep on the shelf. Most of you have a book in your hand that's falling apart. What an amazing gift that is. It's important for us to understand what's in this literature, not only to identify ourselves, but to help the newcomer better understand their problem. We spoke a little bit yesterday about Dr. Silkworth, who worked in Towns Hospital and was one of the first in the medical community to go out on a limb and say that this was in fact a disease. This was not a choice. And he's going to further explain what that means. So if you flip in the doctor's opinion, and I don't know if the page numbers are different in your book. When you get, we'll do it this way. When you get to the doctor's opinion, flip 2 pages over, all right? And we're going to look at this first full paragraph. If you can't find it, I'm going to read some of it to you, so it's okay. The first issue that he's going to address is the physical component of alcoholism, which speaks to the powerlessness of this illness. And it's one of the easier things for us to wrap our mind around, is this physical component. And he writes, "We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy." Right? So when they talk about an allergy, what they're saying is it's an abnormal reaction to any chemical put in or on the body. That's the definition of an allergy. How that pertains to alcoholism is they're going to go on to say that the allergy that an alcoholic has is the phenomenon of craving. Right? So it's not normal for me to crave a poison, but my body craves it anyway. Once I start, I can't stop. My body demands another and another and another, which is why I never got enough. And it's a good time to ask the newcomer, is this your experience? Once you start, can you control how much you drink? And if they're at all like me, they'll tell you no. More often than not, or never, can I control it once it gets in my bloodstream. Right? It says these allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all, which means that I can't switch from liquor to beer, from beer to wine, trying to find that magic combination that I can control. If it gets in my system, it absolutely sets off a craving and I can't stop, right? It's a little bit easier to understand that when you look at your own experience, and it's okay to ask people you sponsor, tell me a little bit about your experience with that, and they'll say things such as, once I start drinking in the bar, I intend to leave in an hour or two after having 3 or 4 drinks, but I can't do it. I can't seem to do it. And they'll be able to quickly identify with this. It says, and once formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Ask them, does this sound familiar? I ask this question every time I'm at a treatment center, and they all sit and nod their head. Yes, that's my experience. Yes, this is my life. It's an important and valid question to ask, have I lost my reliance upon things human? Right? Because if I can stay sober for a relationship, if I can stay sober for a job, for a desire, then I don't need to be in this room. Right? It means I haven't lost the power of choice. This is an important qualification for somebody who's trying to understand the disease of alcoholism. Down at the bottom, they're going to speak to the nature of unmanageability. And we often get confused about what unmanageability is. And we're going to hear people talk about, my life is unmanageable because I can't manage a job. I can't manage a relationship. I can't manage my finances. And there are a lot of people in the world that can't manage those things, but it doesn't make them alcoholic. What makes me alcoholic is the inability to manage the decision to stay away from alcohol for good and for all on my own power. I can't manage that. I make the decision, I set the booze down, but I always go back to it against my own will. Does that make sense? Ask those questions. It's okay for them to be asked. This gives them a better understanding of what they're working with. Dr. Sokworth is going to go on to say men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Well, isn't that the truth? That's a big duh. I love the effect produced by alcohol. Ask the newcomer, what were you willing to give up to have that next drink? Everything, absolutely. Absolutely. That's not normal, right? People who don't suffer from the disease of alcoholism will quit based on not wanting to lose a relationship, not wanting to lose their job, lose their self-respect. I'm willing to humiliate myself to get another drink because it doesn't matter. It has to happen. In Bill's story, I love Bill's story, he writes, liquor ceased to be a luxury and it became a necessity. Ask them if they understand that. Right? A true alcoholic will identify immediately and say, it gives me chills. Absolutely. This is not fun. It's not a party. It's a necessity. Right? It says this sensation is so elusive that while they admit it's injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. It's a lot of fancy words to say. Despite the consequences, I'm willing to go to any lengths to get another drink because my mind tells me it has to happen. My mind tells me it will be okay. My mind tells me I'll manage it better this time. Or my mind doesn't allow me to think about it at all. Right? There's a line later in the book that says, perhaps we didn't think at all. I can identify with that. Have you ever found yourself loaded and went, how did I even get here? How did this even happen? You sort of come to, right? That's the disease of alcoholism. The book's going to identify it as a strange mental blank spot that I suddenly find myself with a drink in my hand. It says, to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. Did yours? If you had pulled me aside at 10 years old, and a bunch of us yesterday raised our hands, we have alcoholics in the family. We saw the disease of alcoholism play out. If we'd have pulled you aside at 10 and said, this is how your life will play out, could we have convinced you of that? No. You couldn't have convinced me of that. But suddenly, what was abnormal growing up became very normal. It's very normal to suffer these consequences. It's very normal to physically suffer. It's very normal to give up anything in my world to get another drink. Right? That's the disease of alcoholism and the progression that the book speaks consistently about. See if this sounds familiar. It says they are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience a sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Every real alcoholic I've ever known has immediately identified with that. This is why I drink. The problem was never alcohol. Alcohol is the symptom. The problem is I can't function without it. Right? And suddenly the person you're sponsoring begins to wake up to the idea that alcohol was never really the issue. And here's why. The delusion is if I set the drink down, I'll be okay. We suffer from that delusion. Our family members are suffering from that delusion. It's one reason there's so much disharmony when an alcoholic initially gets sober in the family. Because everyone thinks, well, they're not drinking anymore, all is well. No, if I don't have a program of recovery, it's about to be a disaster, right? Because you've taken away the only solution that I have and the only thing that makes me function. So we better replace it with something else. And here comes the rest of the steps down the road. It says, after they've succumbed to the desire again, going on to speak about unmanageability, after they've succumbed to the desire again, meaning I've picked up another drink, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is what they mean when they say my alcoholic life becomes the only normal one. And until you've lived this experience, it's hard to identify with it. But the real alcoholic continues to wake up saying, okay, I can't believe I let it get this bad again. I will never do it again. And the delusion is I have the power to set this down at any time I'd like. It's an absolute delusion. Right? Ask the newcomer these questions. What's the worst thing that's ever happened to you as a direct result of drinking? Get that picture in your mind where you said, I will swear to anything, I'll never do it again. Pose the next question. How long was it before you did it again? Some of us weeks, some of us days, lots of us hours. I cannot manage the decision to stay away from it. Welcome to step one. It's about two things, choice and control. Once I start, I can't stop. That's a problem. Bigger problem, I can't stop picking up the first one, right? Unmanageability is what sends me out of these rooms having not done the work to drink again. I have to have a defense against this, otherwise I will continue the cycle over and over and over that the book continues to talk about. There's a couple of qualifying questions that are real important. If you'll flip over to page, it's 44 in the English book, We Gnostics, that chapter no one wants to read. There's a lot of good information in there. I skipped it when I first got sober because I didn't know what agnostic meant. And I thought, well, I'm not one of those, so never mind. But that chapter, not necessary. Did anybody else think they knew everything when they got sober? Am I the only one? Was that arrogant? Okay, thank you for identifying with me. Appreciate it. At the top of the page, it says, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. Well, how did you learn that? Because you read the book. Let me give you a tip. Don't ever let anybody read your big book for you. Sit down with this, study it, flip through it, highlight it, understand this. It says, we hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Non-alcoholic can quit on their own willpower. An alcoholic is absolutely unmanageable around that decision. Now here's the two questions. How many of you guys have been to treatment and filled out that questionnaire that tries to help you see whether you're an alcoholic or not? Do they have those here? Lots of fun questions. They're specifically around consequences. Have you ever wrecked a car? Have you ever gone to jail? Have you ever lost a job around your drinking? Lots of people can answer yes to those, but they stop drinking based on that. I don't have the power to do it. The big book's going to only ask you two questions, and here they are. It says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. The end. Right? Those are the only questions I need to answer, and I need to answer them in here. To me, the book is crystal clear. I have to concede to my innermost self that I'm an alcoholic. Margareta calling me an alcoholic does nothing for me. We've all been called alcoholic, probably, for quite some time before we got sober. But it's important that I have no lingering doubt over whether or not that's true based on my experience. So while you're going through this work and while you're taking other people through this work, I'd encourage you to do this. Take your own experience, match it up with the book and see, does it fit? Is this me? So when I sit in a meeting and I say, I'm Audrey Chapman, I'm an alcoholic, I know that at my core. Not because you've said it's true, right? Those are the things that give me the willingness to go to any lengths to recover, is when I know this is me. And it says, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. To my knowledge, this is the only disease that only a spiritual experience will conquer. Lots of diseases can be cured, can be lessened with symptoms, with medication, with therapy, with treatment. This is the only one that demands of me that I have an entire psychic change. And an entire psychic change doesn't come from sitting with you guys in the meetings. It comes from actually working the steps. That's where the power is to be found. And some of us don't ever hear that message for a long time. So it's important that everyone knows from the beginning, this is what's required of me to get to a different place. I'm just going to read one other thing on step one, and then if you want to chat. I have to be mindful. I can get real carried away talking about the steps. In my version, it's on page 24. It's in the chapter, There is a Solution, and it's the italics portion of the text. This was something that was read to me over and over when I was sitting in treatment and really helped me understand the grave nature of alcoholism. At the top of the page it says, at a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. Did you catch that? It's important to understand and know, because what you're going to hear from the newcomer is, I'm going to stay sober this time because I really, really want to. Because what they've heard in the meetings is, you just have to really, really want this. I got to tell you, darling, I really, really wanted this a long time before I got it. The desire not to do this anymore avails me nothing. I have to actually take some action. It says this tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it's suspected. The needed power to say no to the drink, which Margareta spoke about yesterday, has long since been gone. I just didn't know it until I went to try to stop drinking, or we go to try to moderate. That's always my game. I'm not ever trying to quit. I'm just trying to slow it down just a little bit. Let me take it down a few notches. And I go to do it, and I find myself unable to do so. It says the fact is, this is what he has italicized. It says the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. That's important. That's a great definition of unmanageability. So when I sit in a meeting and I hear somebody say, I'm Audrey, I'm an alcoholic, and I choose not to drink today, that freaks me out, right? Why are you in my meeting? Because if I can choose not to drink today, as much as I love you, I'm at home, watching TV, choosing not to drink. I'm not in a 12-step program putting forth a lot of effort, right, to work a program. If you can choose not to drink today, you cannot sponsor me because I cannot identify with you. You have the power that I don't have, right? The power that I'm going to find in these steps. It says our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent in this area. In every other area, we're fairly strong-willed, are we not? Right? You try to get somebody in here today to do something they don't want to do, it won't happen. We will not do it to spite you. Right? We're strong-willed people. But when it comes to taking that willpower and asserting it not to drinking, I come up short every time. It says we are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. Scariest line in the book to me. We are without defense against the first drink. And this is the point in which I ask the people in the treatment centers, or I ask the women I'm sponsoring, the same question I posed to you before. How long was it after the worst consequence that you picked it back up again? Because this is what everybody's waiting for you to hit bottom. For you to have that final consequence that's enough that you will stop drinking on your own. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't. Which is why I don't need to hear about your war stories in the meeting. My own pain and suffering didn't keep me sober. Your scary story of going to prison won't keep me sober either. Make sense? Those stories are appropriate working one-on-one with a newcomer for identification. But they're not to be discussed in the meeting. The solutions to be discussed in the meeting. If you'll slide over just a little bit across the page, you have the English version too. I'm probably all over the map. Y'all can't. Y'all are in a whole nother book, a whole nother time zone.
Which chapter are you?
It's still in there as a solution. In my book, you just slide across the page, but I don't know.
Interaction is that the same one?
No. There's the paragraph that starts out, if you're a seriously alcoholic, should have been about 6 paragraphs down from what we just read. If you can't find it, I'll read it to you. It says, if you're as seriously alcoholic as we were, I had a flashback to when you do these meetings in a detox center, and the people are trying to find the Roman numerals that you're talking about, and their eyes are not even pointed in the same direction. They can't. And whoever put Roman numerals in a book for drunks, it's just beyond me. But they'd fumble around with the pages. I love Alcoholics Detoxing. They're so fun. I have a warped sense of humor. If you're seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there's no middle-of-the-road solution. Explain to them what middle-of-the-road solution is. And I do this often. Who came into the rooms and didn't get a sponsor but sat in meetings? They all raise their hand. Who got a sponsor but didn't follow directions? Me. Who worked what steps they felt like working and didn't work the ones they didn't want to work? Whole bunch of them. Right? Middle-of-the-road solution. Anything less than what the text asks of me that comes from my own mind is middle-of-the-road solution. Just so we can be clear. Where it says we were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had 2 alternatives. So again, I pose that question. Are you or are you not beyond human aid? Because if you can stay sober based on a sufficient reason, I can't identify. Right? I've had a lot of sufficient reasons to never put another drop of alcohol in my system. I drank right through them. I can't pull that off. So the 2 alternatives, I've never seen a drunk not look for door number 3. It's just in our nature. We're always looking for that easier, softer way. I'll stand in line for the easier, softer way. So we've got 2 alternatives, and it's kind of like being at a fork in the road. And it begins to set us up for the decision we're going to make in that 3rd step. It says 1 was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could. So I can continue down the path that I'm in, living in step 1, living in the horror of waking up every morning, begging myself not to do this again, and knowing for certain it's going to happen again. I can continue on that road. It's an option. It's open to me. Or the other is to accept spiritual help. But here's the condition, right? It says, and it's right behind it. It says, this we did because we honestly wanted to. There's 1. And we were willing to make the effort. That's 2. There's a couple of themes that we're going to run throughout the literature. One of them is willingness, and the other one is action. And I better get real clear, real quick, that it's going to take both of those. I've got to be willing to see is this my truth? And willing to continue on with the rest of the work. And then I have to actually do it. Alcoholics, for whatever reason, we are notorious for running our mouth while our feet sit still, right? This is why people are tired of listening to us. You know, I remember getting sober and it's like, I'm going to be sober, I'm going to be sober. And they're like, okay, right? Nobody was trying to hear it. It wasn't until I shut my mouth and moved my feet, because the book tells me living with an alcoholic, seeing is believing, right? I've damaged these people for years, running my mouth and keeping my feet still, so now I've got to flip it. Everything in recovery seems to be flipped, right? It's a whole nother life. It's why they address it as the fourth dimension versus the third dimension, and we're going to talk a little bit further about that. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Audrey. I have to know what my problem is. You know, otherwise I would never take the solution in step 2. That's how it is. And I recognized myself. I had to go to my experience when I read this book, and I could see immediately that I had the allergy. That was easy for me to understand. Yes, every time I drank, I got drunk. I always overdrank. I've never been sitting in a restaurant and the servant came and asked me, do you want to have another glass of wine? And I said, no, I'm just fine now. It never happened, never. I said, yes, one more. No, take 2, take a bottle. You know, this is how I drank every time. And I didn't intend to get drunk. I didn't go out to get drunk. I drank to get right. You know, to get there, sort of. But I could never get there. I did in the beginning. I had all these 9-step promises. I had a spiritual awakening when I drank the first time. But I mean, I always overdrank. If I could stop after a few drinks when I feel fine, then I wouldn't have a problem, would I? Why am I here? Why am I a member of Alcoholics Anonymous? It is because I cannot control the amount I drink when I drink. Because when I drink, when I drink one drink, I want more all the time. And it's not the alcohol itself that is the problem, because most people can drink. It is that I have a body that when I put alcohol into my body craves more. And the more I drink, the harder the craving gets. That's how it works for an alcoholic body like me. And I could recognize myself immediately in this. That was not hard, you know. I went to a party and I was passed out at 8 o'clock in the evening, and they asked me, what can we do for you? How are you? And I said, give me another drink. Give me another drink. I was passed out, but I wanted more. The more I drank, the more I craved. So that this was easy for me to understand. Yes, I have this physical allergy. And it says in the doctor's opinion that if you don't have this, if you can't recognize this, well, you're not an alcoholic. If you can control how much you drink when you drink, well, control it then. Why am I here if I can control my drinking? That's why I'm here. Because I can't drink. And the doctor could see this. And he said that the only solution is absolute abstinence. That means don't drink. And I knew I couldn't drink, but my problem was that I could not stay away from drinking, even though I wanted to. Because, as it says, I was looking for that sensation. And the doctor, he was not an alcoholic. He said, because they like the effect produced by alcohol. I loved the effect produced by alcohol. And I didn't just love it, I needed that effect. Because without it, I got restless, irritable, discontent. I couldn't cope with life, and I could never, ever manage that decision that I made so many times, and I meant it, to not drink again. I always went back to that first drink again. And that is the circle. And I have to understand that this is me. And when I read it in this book, I understood it immediately, and I had to concede to my innermost self. And that's not what it says in the Swedish book. It says admit, admit. But to concede is to really, really understand here that this is me. And that was not a nice place to be. I was doomed. I knew I was doomed. And without this spiritual solution, I would go back. And it's like Bill says, I don't have a defense against the first drink. And that's what I knew. And that's why I was willing to take step 2. I mean, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous the last time because all my plans had failed, and I had tried it all. All. I had no plans left. I knew that in here. And I mean, why would I take step 2 if I still think that I can manage my life in any way? Well, if I only get that guy, if I only get a new job, if I just travel somewhere, I can get better. If I still have a plan, well, I always say to the women I help, try it. Mm-hmm. Try it. Try every plan that you have to arrange your life so that you can keep yourself sober. And if it doesn't work, well, come back. Because I have to understand that I am powerless. Totally powerless. And that's what it says in step 2, that lack of power, that was my dilemma. And lack of power is powerless. So what do I need? Well, I need power. And I need a power greater than myself. Why? Because I cannot keep myself sober. My family can't keep me sober. My children can't keep me sober. Doesn't matter how much I love them or how much they love me, they couldn't keep me sober. Nothing could keep me sober. I could never manage that decision not to drink again. And I had to concede that to my innermost self. And I knew that in here, that I was doomed. And they offered us a solution for me in step 2. It's very simple, because what was the power greater than myself? Alcohol. I could have had an altar in my house with a bottle of vodka and pray to it. Do with me whatever. It took me everywhere. Took me to disaster. I worshipped it. I could not live without it. So, a power greater than myself was alcohol. And now I needed to find a power greater than myself, because alcohol didn't work anymore. I'd come to that spot. I could never again get that sensation that I had when I first started to drink. So step 2 is really, really very easy. Have I really understood that I am powerless and that I am suffering from alcoholism? And I cannot keep myself sober, and nobody else can keep me sober. And it's also, Bill describes here, he spends 4 chapters on the problem, because I have to understand what my problem is to take step 2, to take the solution, the spiritual solution. And he describes different kinds of mental stages just before we pick up that first drink. And what he says with Jim and Fred and the jaywalker is that it doesn't matter how I feel. I drank when I was happy, I drank when I was unhappy, I drank when I was in a good relationship, I drank when I was in a bad relationship, I drank when I had money, I drank when I didn't have any money. An alcoholic drink no matter what. Alcohol wasn't my problem like everyone told me. It was my solution to everything. I drank no matter what. And I had no power to keep that decision not to drink again. I could keep, without alcohol for a while, sometimes. Sometimes I was good medicated, so I could keep myself sober for a while. I tried everything. Maybe travel kept me sober for a while. But I always drank again. Always. And I had to understand this. And just not understand it. To understand that I was powerless and I'm suffering from a deadly, fatal, progressive disease of alcoholism. And that is why I was so willing to take step 2. And I don't need to understand what that power is. It says here, if I can find it in the book, I just have to be willing to believe in a power greater than myself. And I was willing to believe in anything but me. So step 2 is really very simple. Really very simple. If I have understood my problem, why am I here? Because I cannot control the amount when I drink, and I cannot stay away from it. Then I am powerless, and I need power. And there must be a power greater than myself. But my conception of that power is up to me. And Abby went to Bill. Bill was still drinking. Bill knew Abby. They were drinking buddies. And he'd said, if I ever get as bad as Abby, I will stop. And here Abby came 2 months sober. Thank God for Abby. 2 months sober. And step 2 is hope. Bill could see that something had happened with Abby. It was his appearance. He could see that something had happened. And Abby had a solution to offer him. He didn't take it immediately. They were discussing what God was or what God wasn't. And they were nearly quarreling about it. And then Abby said, why are we quarreling about this? Why don't you choose your own conception of God? And then Bill could surrender and he could see, that I am the problem. And alcohol is my God. And I am willing to believe. And I'm willing. And that takes us to step 3 and the decision that we make to follow through. Because I don't have a choice anymore. I didn't have a choice. Okay?
Okay. So in talking about step 3 and setting us up for that decision, Margareta talked about we don't all have to be on the same page when it comes to this higher power. We absolutely don't. And that's a relief, because that's where the door, Alcoholics Anonymous swings the door wide open to any version of faith that you may have. It makes no difference to us as a fellowship, which leaves us no excuse, right? Because most of us want to cop out on stuff like that. Well, I can't believe the way that you believe. I'm not willing to accept the things that you accept. And AA says it makes no difference to us what religion, if any, you come from, what faith you choose to accept, what conception of a higher power you choose to have. And it's a hard thought for some of us to get our brains around, There's several stories in here that talk about people that had a ton of faith but couldn't seem to get sober because faith was never the problem. Access to the power of God is the problem. And that's what the rest of the steps are designed to get us to see, is that I've got a lot within me that's blocking me from the power. I was in treatment with quite a few people that were, or not in treatment, excuse me, but in the fellowship with quite a few people that were vastly more knowledgeable about my conception of God than I will ever be. Yet they're loaded with me in the same room. Makes sense? And I tell people that in treatment all the time. None of us are in a better position than the other one. So it makes no difference what your concept is. There's a woman who walks in the room that has an immense amount of faith, could tell you everything about God. And there's a man who walks in the room that when you mention the word God, the hair on the back of his neck stands up. And he begins to shut down. Which one of them's in a better position? Neither of them. They're both drunk, right? So it doesn't matter where you sit on the issue. What matters is that your feet continue to move forward. And Margareta did a wonderful job of explaining that, right? So don't overcomplicate it. And don't let the men and women that you sponsor overcomplicate it. Are you willing to believe that what worked for her will work for you? Good. Next. That's the conversation. Makes sense? We will talk about it for hours on end. I used to do it drinking. Constantly. Did anyone else get real philosophical and long-winded when you're drunk? Right. It's a treat. I thought I was so smart, though. Flip over to, I'm glad I'm not the only one who thought that. Flip over to how it works. This is so overread in our fellowship that as soon as we begin to hear the words, rarely have we seen a person fail, everyone just powers down. Right? They're checking their phone, they're talking to the person next to them, they're half asleep. There's amazing things in this chapter and in these first few pages of how it works. But it starts off saying, rarely have we seen a person fail who's thoroughly followed our path. What's our path? It's the 12 steps. It's the textbook. You could read it differently. Rarely have we seen a person follow our path. Right? You've been around long enough sponsoring people. They all want to take a little detour, right? And have their own little variation. Why? Does anybody else have directions? Like physical directions? I can't get anywhere without a map. And constantly when people give me the directions, I want to outsmart them and take a side road. I'll just go a little way, and it's like, what are you doing? I even have that little navigation system, right, that I'll try to outsmart. And it says, you go to the left. I'm terrible with directions. What is my problem? I think I know, right? arrogance will absolutely kill me. And the third step is going to begin to address what my real problem is: selfishness, self-centeredness, being driven by fear, driven by self-delusion, the idea that I know best. That has got to die, right? And the third step is really going to take the time to address this stuff. They're going to use the word honesty 3 times in that first paragraph. Why? It's the first spiritual principle I'm going to learn. Is this honestly me in the first step, or is it not? Am I honestly willing to go to any lengths? That's a tough question, isn't it? If you understand your truth, it gets real simple, real quick, right? Die with a bottle in my hand or accept some spiritual help. We might take a moment to think on it, right? Pause for a minute. And then if you understand your truth, you get your feet moving real quick. But they're going to use the word honesty 3 times. It's imperative. And none of us come in here knowing how to be honest. Was anybody else kind of a liar when they got here? I told, not you, Thomas, you're still lying. I told people in treatment I was an author, right? No reason. What had I ever written except a shoddy inventory? That's the only thing I've ever written in my whole life. But I wanted to seem like I was something else. And the big book's going to talk about this in a very real way when they talk about the alcoholic leads a double life. You know, identify with that. This is where the people you sponsor, when they start going through the book, an emotional connection begins to be made, right? It's easy to take my experience and look at the first step and see where the components of alcoholism are at play, right? Physically, mentally. And as I begin to move through this third step and understand what my true problem is, that I'm a life driven by self-will, there's an emotional connection that begins to be made. This is where I started thinking, oh my God, this big book, it's like it's been following me. It's like it knows me, right? It's clocking me, if you will. So after the A, B, and C's, what they're going to tell me and how it works, at the very next paragraph, it says being convinced. Being convinced of what? That's the question. Well, it's the A, B, and C's, right? Am I alcoholic and can't manage my own life, which means I can't stop starting? That probably no human power could relieve my alcoholism. Again, am I not beyond human aid? See that God could, and what if He were sought? Sought is an action word. It means to seek. It doesn't mean to think, to talk about, to, sit and wonder about. If you want to do those things, you're welcome to do them, but it won't get you anywhere, right? Am I willing to seek Him? Well, how do I do that? I continue to work the rest of these steps. I hear people say all the time, I'm on my third step. What? How are you on your... It's a decision. Tick-tock. What are we doing? Why are we sitting and thinking, right? The big book is crystal clear that it denotes a sense of urgency. We asked the question earlier, how long was it before you picked up a drink after the worst consequence you've had? That's your time frame that you're working with, right? I've got a little bit of grace time that God allows me to do this work, and if I don't capitalize on it, my mind begins to speak to me again. And it tells me things like, this is not that big of a deal. You've overreacted once again, Audrey. Calm down. It's just a couple of drinks. It's just this. It's just that. This time it will be different. Or this is not necessary for you. How long is it that I have to work with this stuff before my mind begins to talk to me again? You're really the only one that can answer that question. I can tell you for me, it's a very short time frame, right? So I got to get through the other side of this work. So it says we were at step 3, which is we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood Him. So my will is my thoughts, my life is my actions. I'm turning everything over to God. If I knew how to do that, we talked about this last night, it'd be a 3-step program. Right? How many times have you gotten on your knees and said, I'll do anything, show me how to live? But then I got up off my knees. That's the problem. Now what? I made the decision many times, but what's every decision always have to be followed with? Action. And if I'm not taking the action, I never really made a decision. Make sense? So the rest of the book is going to explain what I'm going to do with this. And it says the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Was yours? I wasn't successful when I showed up to AA. And I'm not talking about in business, in love, in career, anything like that. I'm talking about at living. I was unsuccessful. I was driven by what the book is going to call the bedevilments, right? Let me do this real quick. I'm going to flip back to the agnostics. It's on 52 in my book. I'm not certain what it is in the Danish book. See if you can identify with this. This is the internal condition. When somebody read this to me in treatment, I sat straight up in my seat because it was the first time anything had ever been addressed to my spirit, that everybody understood what was going on with me. It says we were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. Is it sounding familiar? It doesn't mean you're a crybaby. It means the pendulum swings from anger to fear to self-pity to tears to boredom to worry. It's constant. It says we are prey to misery and depression. Absolutely. This is me without a drink in my hand and without the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Anybody depressed? Anybody have anxiety? Ask these questions when you're working with somebody new. Watch their eyes light up. We couldn't make a living. It doesn't mean you couldn't earn money. Do you like the life you're living? Right? This is internal stuff. This is what I'm drinking to overcome. This is what I spend all my time trying to arrange the external stuff so that I can get right internally. Because we're taught that from a very young age. Look out for yourself. If you want to get something done, you make it happen. You're responsible. It's all about you. That's real scary, isn't it? It can no longer be all about me. Right? It says we had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. That's my real problem. Right? I've got an allergy in my body, an obsession in my mind, and my spirit is fueled by a malady. That's a problem. This is why I can't live without a drink in my hand. So if I flip back to how it works, they're going to spend an adequate amount of time talking about why this doesn't work, how I live. We don't have time to go into all of it, but they're going to address it in a manner. Bill is a visual person, and I love that about him. I love the way he writes. And he talks about the actor running the show. And the first time I read that, I thought nothing of it. I was like, I couldn't wake up to the idea that the actor should never be running the show. How ridiculous is that? Who runs the show? The director. But I am the actor, and I am my stage character. I've got many stage characters. Whoever I need you to see me as so that I can get my needs met. Because let me be clear, I'm here for me, no matter what. Margareta and I talk about this all the time. We have very similar personalities in the fact that we think we are givers, right? We are precious, precious givers, but why? Because I need you to think a certain way of me, right? That's what drove me my entire life. But they talk about the actor running the show, and the way that I visualize that is that there's a director backstage. He has the entire script to a T. Everybody's position, everyone's costumes, all their lines, the lighting, the decor, the timing, it's all in sync with his plan. And then there's this little actor who has the smallest part in the play. And he gets on stage and says, "Places," and starts snapping his fingers at everybody. "You sit down. This is not your role anymore. You change your outfit. You don't talk anymore. You take his script. You're playing this different role," yelling at the AV, the audiovisual people, to adjust all the lighting, telling people who are in the audience where to sit. Why? Because he has everyone's best intentions at heart. There I am. Right? And when I could take that little character and understand that it applied to every area of my life, I could see how selfish I was. Did anyone else not think they were selfish? I knew I was on some level, but I did not understand the degree to my selfishness, really until I hit the fourth column of inventory. Then it really had a good sponsor rub my nose in the fourth column real good. But this idea begins to set us up for why is it necessary for me to take this decision? Not only am I suffering from the disease of alcoholism, which renders me powerless, and I need the power, also my life is a disaster. I can't manage an internal condition that's going on with me. My life is not a success. It begins to explain more of why I have the need for God in my life. Margareta talked about this before. It says selfishness and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven. Think about that word. Truly, I have it circled in my book. driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. True or false? Have you ever been unable not to do something? That's what a life driven looks like. Right? I'm scared that I'm not going to get what I need. So I begin to take action to ensure I get what I want. Right? Meyer says it's the battle cry of every drunk he's ever known. I want what I want. And I want it the way I want it, when I want it, and you better, by God, give it to me. And if I need to be mean and hateful, I will. More often than not, I've found that sweet and precious and complimentary works better. Right? But whatever method needs to happen is what's going to happen, because I know best. And the idea that self is in charge and that self knows best is an idea that has to die in that third step. And they're going to address that in the promises. The greatest promise that I can find in the big book says, so our troubles we think are basically of our own making. Did y'all know that was a promise? That's the greatest truth I can see. Because if my problems are of your making, I'm screwed. And I will continue to drink myself to death. But if my problems are of my own making, something can be done about that. Right? The necessary power that I begin to tap into begins to change those things. I can tell you this much. What I've learned over the years is that victims don't stay sober. They just don't. Because it's all about them. Still. I'm thinking about what I didn't get, what I wasn't able to say, what you don't understand about me, and it's a constant thinking about me. It's all about me. I ask people that question in treatment. Are you tired of you yet? Yeah, I mean, was anybody else sick of themselves by the time they got here? I'm so tired of me. I'm tired of thinking about myself. I'm tired of talking, processing about me, journaling about me, having therapy sessions about me, turning every conversation to me. By the time I got here, I was like, God, this is something different. I'm so over me. I'm on my own nerves. Right? And I could not be. So it says, this is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. That's how. It didn't work. That's why. And so it's going to set me up for a decision. Next, we decided that hereafter in the drama of life, God was going to be our director. It didn't say the drama of life was going to stop. Right? What the newcomer is going to assume is that they work the steps and there will never be another care or problem in the world. That's a delusion. You need to smash it as a sponsor. Right? It says in the drama of life. It just means you sat down and let God stand up. He was already standing. You just pushed him to the side, right? He's going to be the director, which means you're going to take direction from him. Something that we're not very good at oftentimes. It says he's the principal, we are his agent. He's the father, we are his children. Most good ideas are simple. Again, the big book's really clear. Don't complicate this. The people you sponsor may have vastly more knowledge about spiritual matters than you ever will. Help them to see however much they know. Self-knowledge, knowledge about God availed them nothing. It's going to be about a simplistic program of action that gets me connected to the power. Make sense? You can know a lot of things. A lot of you knew a lot of things before you got here. Yet you got here with a bottle in your hand. Right? Help us to understand this stuff. So it says this concept was the keystone. What's the keystone? I knew nothing about architecture or buildings or anything like that. It had to be explained to me. Explain this to people you sponsor. There's some really important stuff in here that you can miss. You can just read right over it. But what Bill's telling me is this idea that I'm going to let God be God and I'm just going to be Audrey is going to hold everything else in place. Right? This role reversal where I sit down and let him step forward is going to be what keeps the rest of the steps vital and alive. And there's a spiritual momentum that picks up when I work these steps. And you watch it with people you sponsor. It's amazing. Where their spirit literally begins to wake up. And they begin to come alive. Encourage them to continue to move. This is why I disagree wholeheartedly with the idea of working the steps slowly. You begin to lose that momentum. It continues to build one step after another after another. The more I work, the freer I get. Why would I slow that process down? We already said some of us have a week to a month before we're loaded again. Why would I think I could work a step a month? There's 12 steps in 12 months. Is that a coincidence? Yes. It does not mean that I work a step a month. I love your laugh. It's so funny. Right? But it talks about a new and triumphant arch through which I pass to freedom. So the decision becomes, I decide to be a student and practitioner of this program. That's the decision. I don't have to know what that looks like. I don't have to intellectually understand it. You know what mine looked like? Teary-eyed, freezing my butt off on somebody's back porch, on my knees, reeking of cigarettes, having not slept, begging God, show me how to do this, I'll do anything. Got up off my knees, she handed me a 4-step. That's it. There was no profound moment where I went, oh, the heavens have parted, right? And they sprinkled fairy dust and it was very magical. No, it was a decision followed up by action. I can feel any way I'd like to about it. Now, some of us are going to have some profound spiritual experiences with that 3rd step. Cool. Don't stop there. Continue to move. It's going to tell me exactly when I'm supposed to do this. And it says, when we sincerely took such a position, sincerely, when I made that decision, it's going to give us a whole host of promises. One of the most amazing being, established on this footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. It took me years to see that word little. The scope of what I see is very narrow because it involves me. The scope of what God sees is broad, vast. So suddenly my little plans and designs don't seem as paramount anymore. I begin to have less of them because I realize that I don't know best. Me knowing best earned me a seat in Alcoholics Anonymous. Right? Maybe I don't know everything there is to know. It talks about new power flowing in, peace of mind, facing life successfully. But here's the biggest one. It says we were reborn. Well, in order for me to be reborn, something has to die. Self has to die. The idea that I know best has to die. Me wanting my way has got to go. The problem is I don't know how to do that. And that's what the rest of the steps are designed to get me to see. So it gives me that 3rd step prayer. Notice there's no amen at the end of that prayer because the rest of the steps in between is prayer and action. There's going to be an amen at the end of that 7th step prayer because what it's doing is it's setting up a contract. You can call it a covenant, you can call it an agreement, whatever you're comfortable with. There's a contract between me and this power. I'm vocalizing my decision to do the rest of this work. Then I continue to do it. Then I again ask for that needed power in step 6 and 7, and I sign off on the deal. And we're going to talk more about that later. Do you have anything on step 3?
No, not much. Just that I have to understand that the problem is me. You know, the problem is me. And selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. It doesn't say alcohol anymore. You know, now I have to understand that the problem is me. And like Audrey said, you know, when I was sick, I woke up every morning, the first thought I had, how am I today? How am I feeling today? How do I look? What do I have to do today? What are the people gonna, you know, all this. I was running the show totally. I was so selfish and self-centered, and I was driven and I couldn't see it. And I have to understand that I am the problem in step 3. And I have to make the decision to turn. You know, it's a decision that I make to follow through with the rest of the program to find this power. But I cannot give my life and my will over to God in step 3 because I am blocked. And that's why I have to look at what's blocking me from the power. And I was so willing to do that because I knew it was about my life. You know, I had to see the truth, what was blocking me. But it's a decision, and it's a vital decision. And it says that that I had to be very sincere in this decision. Because it's what the program is. 3 till 12. Okay? We're done?
I'm Henrik, I'm an alcoholic. 1 hour with these two power ladies, and I know I'm a full-blown alcoholic. Thank you for that. 10 minutes break, we'll be back at 11:20. Thank you.
I need some more coffee.